I realized something was wrong the night I sat in a crowded room and felt completely unseen. Not ignored, not rejected, just invisible. Before we begin, please support MindShift Stories by subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a comment. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories with the world. I used to think loneliness had a certain look. Quiet apartments, empty weekends, people who sat alone at lunch or didn't get invited anywhere. I didn't see myself in that picture. My days were full. I worked a regular office job, the kind where emails never stop, and meetings pretend to matter more than they do. I had coworkers who greeted me, friends who texted occasionally, and the routine that felt stable enough to not question. Every morning I followed the same pattern. Coffee from the same place, same seat on the train, same playlist in my headphones. I liked predictability. It gave me a sense of control, like life was manageable if I didn't look too closely. At work, I was known as reliable. Not exciting, not difficult, just steady. And I was fine with that. I remember thinking, this is adulthood. This is what it looks like. But somewhere between answering emails and nodding through conversations, something subtle started happening. A quiet tension I couldn't name. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't stress. It was more like a background noise I couldn't turn off. I'd be talking to someone, smiling at the right moments, and suddenly realize I wasn't really there. My mind would drift, not to anything specific, just away, like I was watching myself participate instead of actually participating. I told myself it was normal. Everyone zones out. Everyone gets tired. That belief stayed with me longer than it should have. The first time I noticed something didn't quite add up was during lunch at work. A few of us were sitting together talking about weekend plans, trips, family visits, random stories that didn't really matter. I listened, nodded, laughed when everyone else did. Then someone asked me, "What about you?" I opened my mouth, paused, and said something vague. Probably just relaxing. It was true, but incomplete. No one questioned it. The conversation moved on instantly, like my answer had no weight. And for some reason, that small moment stayed with me. Not because they ignored me, but because I realized I didn't give them anything real to respond to. On the way back to my desk, I remember thinking, when was the last time I actually shared something honest? That question made me uncomfortable. I brushed it off, told myself I valued privacy, that I didn't need to explain my life to anyone, that independence was a strength. But later that evening, sitting alone on my couch with the TV playing something I wasn't watching, the quiet felt heavier than usual. I wasn't lonely in the obvious sense. I just felt disconnected. A few weeks later, something small happened that changed everything. It was after work, late enough that the office was almost empty. I ran into Mark, a guy from another department. We didn't know each other well, just exchanged polite hellos before. He looked tired, more than usual. We stood near the elevators, waiting. Silence stretched between us, the kind most people rush to fill. I almost reached for my phone, but for some reason, I didn't. Instead, I asked, "Long day?" He let out a breath that sounded heavier than the question deserved. "Yeah," he said, then paused. "Honestly, yeah." That second yeah was different. I nodded, expecting the conversation to end there, but he kept talking. About deadlines, about pressure, about how exhausting it felt to always seem okay at work when he wasn't. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer advice. I just listened. When the elevator arrived, he stopped mid-sentence, like he'd suddenly realized what he was doing. "Sorry," he said quickly. "Didn't mean to dump that on you." I told him it was fine, and I meant it. As the doors closed, something strange settled in my chest. Not discomfort, not sympathy, recognition. That interaction replayed in my head for days, not because of what Mark said, but because of how easily it came out once someone asked a simple, honest question. I started noticing things after that. The way people would say, "I'm good," with a smile that didn't quite match. The pauses before answers, the jokes that sounded like deflections. And uncomfortably, the way I did the same thing. I realized I was surrounded by people who were emotionally distant, not because they didn't care, but because none of us felt invited to be real, including me. That realization didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly, like a truth that didn't want to be dramatic, just undeniable. I had spent years being easy to be around by being emotionally neutral, pleasant, agreeable, non-demanding, and without meaning to, I had made myself invisible. The turning point came on a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in a cafe, pretending to read while watching people come and go. A couple laughed at something private. Someone typed furiously on the laptop. A woman sat alone, staring into her coffee, not touching it. I remember thinking, everyone here is carrying something. That thought stopped me, because for the first time, I didn't see myself as separate from them. I saw myself as part of the same quiet struggle. And I asked myself a question I hadn't allowed before. When was the last time someone really knew how I was doing? The answer wasn't recent. That's when I realized the loneliness I felt wasn't caused by others. It was built from my own habits. I avoided depth because it felt risky. I kept things light to avoid burdening people. I stayed vague to stay safe. And in doing that, I taught people how to treat me at a distance. The consequences weren't dramatic. There was no breakdown, no confrontation, just a slow shift. I started noticing how often I dismissed my own emotions internally, how quickly I told myself it's not that serious, how often I chose silence over honesty. And with that awareness came discomfort, because change, even quiet change, is uncomfortable. The next time someone asked how I was, I hesitated, then answered honestly, but gently, not with a confession, just with something real. Actually, I've been feeling a bit off lately. The response surprised me. They didn't pull away. They didn't panic. They leaned in. Not dramatically, not like a movie moment, just enough. That small exchange did more than months of polite conversations ever had. What I learned wasn't that everyone is lonely. That idea is too simple. What I learned is that loneliness often hides behind functionality, behind routine, behind people who seem fine. It lives in assumptions, in the belief that no one wants to hear the truth, in the fear of being seen as too much or not enough. I used to think connection required chemistry, timing, or effort from others. Now I see it starts with permission. Permission to be slightly uncomfortable. Permission to speak before the perfect words form. Permission to let someone see you before you're fully ready. Loneliness isn't always about being alone. Sometimes it's about being present, but not engaged. Heard, but not understood. And often it's invisible because we've learned how to hide it so well. These days, my life doesn't look dramatically different. Same job, same routine, same coffee. But something has shifted internally. I listen differently. I answer differently. I notice pauses instead of rushing past them. And when I feel that familiar emptiness creeping in, I don't immediately blame the world. I ask myself, am I showing up honestly or just efficiently?
Because the invisible battle of loneliness isn't won by filling time or staying busy. It's softened by moments of courage most people never notice. So, if you've ever felt alone in a room full of people, maybe the question isn't why no one sees you. Maybe it's whether you've allowed yourself to be seen.